In March 2000, a joint training exercise between Michigan State Police and the FBI turned into a nightmare in the forests northwest of Traverse City. What was supposed to be a routine 3-day wilderness tracking course ended with 2 federal agents dead, 5 others injured, and a cover-up that reached the highest levels of the Bureau. The official report cited a bear attack and training accident. The survivors knew better. So before we continue, make sure you subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. My name is Special Agent David Carver, retired. I spent 23 years with the FBI, most of it in violent crimes and fugitive apprehension. I've tracked killers through the Appalachians, conducted raids in urban war zones, and seen things that would make most people quit the job. None of it prepared me for what happened in those woods. I'm telling this story now because I'm dying, cancer, and the NDAs and threats don't mean much when you're counting days instead of years. Someone needs to know what really happened. Someone needs to understand why we were ordered to forget. The training exercise was Assistant Director Warren's idea. He wanted to improve coordination between state and federal agencies for fugitive tracking in wilderness environments. Michigan was chosen because of its vast forested regions and the state police's reputation for wilderness skills. The plan was simple. 12 agents, 6 FBI and 6 Michigan State Police, would spend 3 days in the Manistee National Forest, learning advanced tracking techniques, wilderness survival, and coordinated search operations. We arrived at the staging area on March 15th, a cold Wednesday morning with patches of old snow still clinging to the shaded hollows. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. Our instructors were Sergeant Dale Mitchell and Corporal James Torres from the State Police Tactical Unit, both experienced woodsmen with decades of combined wilderness experience. They'd run dozens of these trainings without incident. The FBI contingent included myself, Special Agent Rachel Foster, who specialized in forensics and evidence collection, Special Agent Marcus Webb from the Hostage Rescue Team, Special Agent Jennifer Cole from Violent Crimes, Special Agent Thomas Briggs who handled organized crime, and Special Agent Kevin Patterson from our Detroit field office. We were all experienced field agents, physically fit, and trained in firearms and defensive tactics. This wasn't supposed to be dangerous. It was meant to be educational. The Michigan State Police brought Trooper Linda Hayes, who had 15 years with the K-9 unit, Trooper Michael Garcia, who specialized in search and rescue, Trooper Robert Chen from their tactical team, Trooper Amy Sullivan, who handled evidence recovery, and Trooper James Wright, who coordinated their wilderness training programs. Add Mitchell and Torres, and we had 14 people total. Professional, capable, armed. Day 1 went perfectly. We hiked 8 miles into the forest, establishing a base camp near a stream in a clearing surrounded by dense hardwoods and pines. Mitchell taught us how to read tracks in different soil conditions, how to estimate the age of disturbances, and how to predict a fugitive's direction based on terrain features. We practiced moving silently through the underbrush, communicating with hand signals, and maintaining tactical awareness in an environment without radio coverage. That evening we built fires, ate MREs, and shared stories. The state troopers were good people, easy to work with, and they knew their craft. Mitchell told us about some of the fugitives they'd caught in these woods over the years. Men who thought they could disappear into the forest and were wrong. He had a dry sense of humor and a way of making tracking sound like chess played with footprints and broken twigs. Around the fire that first night, Torres mentioned the local legends. He did it casually, almost as a joke, but there was something in his voice that suggested he didn't find it entirely funny. He talked about the Michigan Dogman, a creature from Native American folklore and more recent sightings dating back to the late 1800s. A bipedal canine, 7 feet tall, with a wolf's head and a muscular humanoid body covered in dark fur. Supposed to appear in years ending in 7, though there were exceptions. We laughed. Of course we laughed. We were federal agents and state troopers, not superstitious teenagers around a campfire. But Torres didn't laugh with us. He just stared into the flames and said that the local Odawa people had stories about these woods going back centuries. Stories about the Wendigo and other things that hunted in the darkness. He said they avoided certain areas, especially in winter and early spring, when food was scarce and predators were desperate. Mitchell told him to knock it off, that he was going to give the feds nightmares. We all laughed again, nervous laughter this time. Then we turned in, sleeping in our tents, arranged in a rough circle around the fire. I remember lying in my sleeping bag that first night, warm and comfortable, listening to the wind moving through the pines. I felt safe. That feeling would be gone by the next evening. Day 2 started with more intensive training. We split into 3 teams of 4 and 1 team of 2 for a tracking exercise. Each team would lay a trail through the forest, trying to evade detection while the other teams practiced pursuing. Mitchell and Torres would evaluate our performance. My team consisted of myself, Rachel Foster, and troopers Chen and Sullivan. We were designated as the first evading team. We spent 2 hours laying a complex trail, doubling back, using streams to hide our tracks, and employing the techniques Mitchell had taught us. The morning was cold but clear, our breath misting in the air as we moved through the forest. Chen was particularly skilled, showing us how to step on rocks and exposed roots to avoid leaving prints, how to use natural features to break up our trail pattern. Sullivan had a knack for reading terrain, guiding us along routes that would be difficult to follow. Rachel and I were learning fast, applying the previous day's lessons. We moved quietly through the undergrowth, communicating with hand signals, keeping our spacing tight. It was challenging work but satisfying, the kind of practical training that felt valuable. I remember thinking this was exactly what we needed, skills that would translate directly to fugitive tracking in wilderness environments. Around mid-morning, while we were crossing a small ravine, Chen stopped abruptly and held up a closed fist. We all froze. He was crouched low, examining something in the leaf litter. When I moved closer, I saw what had caught his attention. A deer carcass, maybe 2 days old, partially covered with forest debris. But the kill was strange. The deer's neck was broken cleanly, the head twisted at an impossible angle. There were no bite marks, no signs of feeding. Just that broken neck and scratch marks along the flanks that looked almost surgical in their precision. Chen photographed it with his department-issue camera, making notes about the location. Sullivan examined the surrounding area and found more signs: disturbed earth, broken branches at about 7 feet high, a smell that wasn't quite right. Not the usual predator musk, but something sharper, more acrid. We marked the location on our maps and continued the exercise, but the mood had shifted. Something about that kill felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. We returned to base camp around noon. The other teams had already arrived, comparing notes on their tracking exercises. Mitchell was setting up a tactical map on a portable easel, marking trails and discussing the finer points of pursuit tactics. Torres was organizing lunch supplies. It all looked normal, routine, exactly what a training camp should look like. That normalcy made what we found next even more disturbing. The camp was undisturbed at first glance, but as we approached, details emerged that set off alarm bells. The food supplies stored in bear bags hung from a tree branch 12 feet off the ground were torn open. Not pulled down, torn open while still hanging. The bags were shredded with precision, the contents scattered on the ground below in a pattern that suggested deliberate searching rather than frantic feeding. Mitchell was already examining the scene when we arrived. He looked up at us, his face tight with concern. Agent Patterson and Trooper Hayes were photographing the damage, while Webb stood guard with his rifle ready. Torres was walking the camp perimeter, his eyes on the ground, reading something in the disturbed earth that I couldn't yet see. The tracks were everywhere once you knew to look for them. Large canine prints, but wrong in subtle ways that became more obvious the longer you studied them. Mitchell crouched beside the clearest impression, near our supply cache, and pulled out a measuring tape. He worked in silence for several minutes, taking multiple measurements, photographing from different angles. When he finally stood, his face had gone pale. Torres called him over to the tree line. I followed, curiosity overcoming caution. What Torres had found made my stomach drop. A sequence of tracks leading from the forest to our camp and back, showing clear bipedal locomotion. The stride length was over 6 feet, the depth of the impression suggesting something very heavy moving on 2 legs. But the prints themselves were canine, with 5 distinct claw marks and a pad structure that was too elongated, too large. There was something else. Tree bark had been stripped at about 7 feet high on several trunks surrounding the camp, the wood beneath showing deep gouges and parallel lines. Whatever made those marks had been strong enough to tear through living wood like it was paper. Torres ran his fingers along one of the gouges, his jaw tight. He said something in Spanish, too quiet for me to hear, but Mitchell heard it and nodded grimly. Rachel approached with her evidence kit and took castings of the best prints. She worked quickly and professionally, but I noticed her hands shaking slightly. She'd seen the same things we had. She knew these tracks didn't match anything in her experience or training. When she finished, she looked at Mitchell and asked the question we were all thinking. What made these? Mitchell didn't answer immediately. He walked the perimeter again, studying the tracks, the damaged supplies, the claw marks on the trees. He consulted with Torres in low voices, their conversation too quiet to overhear, but intense. Finally, he gathered us together and delivered his assessment. Large predator, species unknown, exhibiting unusual behavior including bipedal movement and apparent intelligence in how it searched our supplies. Immediate evacuation was mandatory. Agent Briggs argued that we should at least document everything thoroughly, take more photographs, collect more evidence. He was the analytical type, always wanting complete data before making decisions. Mitchell shut him down immediately. Whatever made those tracks had been in our camp, had gone through our supplies with apparent purpose, and had shown no fear of human presence. We were leaving now, and we were staying together in tight formation. We packed in tense silence. Every sound from the forest made us jump, made hands drift toward weapons. The normal background noise of the woods, birds calling, wind in the trees, seemed to have diminished. It wasn't the complete silence we'd encounter later, but it was muted, wrong. Animals knew something was in these woods that shouldn't be there, and they were reacting accordingly. Agent Cole found something while packing her tent, a tuft of dark fur snagged on a branch near where she'd been sleeping. The fur was coarse and thick, about 4 inches long, with a texture unlike anything I'd felt. Not bear, not wolf, not any domestic dog breed. Rachel sealed it in an evidence bag, adding it to the castings and photographs. She didn't look happy about it. None of us were. Mitchell announced we were cutting the training short and heading back to the trailhead immediately. He kept his voice calm and professional, using his command presence to prevent panic, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept scanning the tree line. Torres had already unslung his rifle and was checking the magazine. No one needed to be told this was serious. We formed up quickly, the military and law enforcement training overriding the confusion and fear. Mitchell established a tactical column, himself on point, Torres bringing up the rear, the rest of us spaced evenly with overlapping fields of observation. Every fourth person was designated as security, responsible for maintaining situational awareness and watching for threats. I ended up in a security position, rifle ready, eyes constantly moving. The hike started well enough. We moved at a good pace, faster than the leisurely walk that had brought us in, but not so fast that we'd exhaust ourselves before reaching safety. The trail was clear and well marked. The weather held fair. Under normal circumstances, we would have made the staging area by mid-afternoon, but circumstances were far from normal. About an hour into the march, I noticed the bird calls had stopped entirely. Not gradually fading, but cutting off abruptly, as if a switch had been thrown. The forest went silent except for our footsteps and breathing. Even the insects seemed to have disappeared. Hayes, who'd been walking ahead of me, turned back with a questioning look. She'd noticed it too. Mitchell halted us with a raised fist. We stopped instantly, everyone dropping into defensive crouches, weapons up, scanning the surrounding forest. The silence pressed against us, thick and unnatural. I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood rushing in my ears. My mouth was dry despite the water I'd been drinking. Every shadow between the trees seemed to hold potential threats. Torres moved up to consult with Mitchell. They had a brief, intense conversation that involved a lot of pointing at the forest and checking their maps. When they turned back to us, Mitchell's face was grim. He said we were changing course, cutting cross-country, to reach a secondary trail that would get us to the staging area faster. It would be harder going, rougher terrain, but it would save time and avoid an area he no longer felt comfortable traversing. We moved out again, this time leaving the established trail and pushing through denser undergrowth. The going was slower, more exhausting. branches caught at our clothes and gear. Roots threatened to trip the unwary. But we maintained formation and discipline, everyone keeping their assigned spacing and sectors of responsibility. Professional law enforcement doing what we were trained to do. That's when the sound came. Low at first, almost subsonic, a rumble that I felt in my chest before I heard it with my ears. Then it rose in pitch and volume, becoming a howl that held notes no wolf or dog ever made. It was rage and hunger and intelligence all wrapped together, echoing through the trees from somewhere to our right, maybe 200 yards away. The sound lasted 5 seconds and cut off abruptly. We stood frozen in the silence that followed. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We just stood there with our weapons raised, hearts pounding, waiting for something else to happen. When nothing did, Mitchell got us moving again, but faster now, abandoning any pretense of caution. Speed was survival. Distance was safety. We needed to put miles between us and whatever had made that sound. Patterson was the first to actually see it. He'd been assigned to watch our left flank, scanning the forest as we moved. Later he told me he'd felt eyes on him for several minutes before he spotted the source. Something was pacing us through the trees, moving parallel to our path, matching our speed exactly. Staying in the shadows, using the terrain to remain mostly hidden, but occasionally visible in brief glimpses. When he finally got a clear look, his training failed him. He stumbled, went down hard on one knee, his rifle clattering against rocks. We all spun toward him, weapons tracking, expecting an attack, but Patterson was just staring into the forest, his face gone white, his breathing rapid and shallow. He tried to speak twice before words came out. "Something's following us," he finally managed. "Walking upright, too tall, wrong shape." Mitchell didn't waste time on questions. He pulled Patterson to his feet, checked that he wasn't injured, and got us moving immediately. We picked up the pace even more, now almost jogging despite the rough terrain and heavy gear. People were breathing hard, sweating despite the cool air, but nobody complained. We'd all heard that howl. We'd all seen Patterson's face. Whatever was out there, we wanted distance from it. For the next 30 minutes, we saw nothing, heard nothing. The forest remained eerily quiet, but the sense of being watched never faded. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, finger resting on the trigger guard of my rifle. Rachel, normally calm and collected, was jumpy too. We all were. The rational part of my mind insisted there had to be a logical explanation, but the primal part, the ancient survival instinct that predated reason, knew we were prey. The attack came without warning, sudden and devastating. One moment we were pushing through dense undergrowth, maintaining our tactical formation, moving as fast as the terrain allowed. The next moment something massive crashed through the brush from our right side, moving with explosive speed that seemed impossible for anything that size. I caught a glimpse of dark fur and impossible height before it slammed into Trooper Wright. The impact was like watching a car hit a pedestrian. Wright was lifted completely off his feet, his rifle flying from his hands, his body ragdolling through the air. He hit a tree trunk 10 feet away with a sound that made my stomach turn, a wet crack of breaking bone. Then he crumpled to the ground and didn't move. Training took over. 12 weapons came up, 12 trained law enforcement officers engaging a threat the way we'd been taught since the academy. We fired in a sustained burst that should have dropped an elephant. The noise was incredible, overlapping cracks and booms that echoed through the forest. I saw muzzle flashes from every direction as we poured rounds into the space where the creature had been. I got a clear look at it then, illuminated by our muzzle flashes in strobing glimpses. 7 feet tall, maybe more, covered in dark fur that looked almost black in the shadows, muscular beyond anything natural, with shoulders that looked designed for tearing things apart. The head was a wolf's head, but enlarged, more intelligent, with amber eyes that caught the light and reflected it back. and those eyes held awareness, calculation, intelligence that no animal should possess. My rounds hit it, I'm certain of that. I watched the impacts, saw the fur ripple, saw it stagger from the force, but it didn't fall. It absorbed punishment that would have killed any bear, any wolf, any living thing I knew of. And then, while we were still firing, while brass was still raining down around our feet, it turned and crashed back into the forest, moving fast despite the wounds, moving with purpose and direction rather than blind panic. The creature was gone in seconds, vanishing into the dense undergrowth like smoke. We stood in ringing silence, our ears damaged from the gunfire, smoke hanging in the still air, brass casings scattered on the forest floor around us. Nobody moved for several long seconds. We just stood there, fingers still on triggers, scanning for threats, trying to process what we'd just seen. Torres broke the spell, shouting Wright's name and rushing to where the trooper lay crumpled against the tree. Hayes followed immediately, her medical training taking over. I maintained security with half the group while the other half converged on Wright, forming a protective circle around the downed officer. My hands were shaking so badly I had trouble keeping my rifle steady. Wright was alive but barely. Hayes assessed him with quick professional efficiency. Multiple broken ribs, at least 3, possibly more. Possible internal bleeding. Definitely a concussion, possibly worse. His breathing was labored and wet-sounding, suggesting lung damage. He needed a hospital immediately. Needed surgery and monitoring and care we couldn't provide in the middle of the forest. Without treatment, Hayes gave him maybe 24 hours. With treatment, his chances were good. But we were 8 miles from help with something hunting us. Mitchell made the decision quickly. We'd carry Wright out, moving as fast as possible while maintaining tactical awareness. No more stops except what was absolutely necessary. No more caution about noise. Speed was everything now. We rigged a stretcher from branches and spare jackets, working efficiently despite the fear that sat in all our chests like ice. Wright regained consciousness briefly, long enough to moan in pain, then slipped back under, probably for the best given what we were about to do. The next hour was a nightmare of exhaustion and terror. 4 of us carried the stretcher while 8 maintained security, rotating every 15 minutes when the carriers were exhausted. Wright was a big man, well over 200 pounds, and carrying him through rough terrain while watching for threats and maintaining speed was brutal work. My shoulders burned, my hands cramped on the stretcher poles. Sweat soaked through my clothes despite the cold. But worse than the physical exhaustion was the psychological pressure. We saw nothing, heard nothing, but the sense of being watched never faded. I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision only to find nothing when I looked directly. Shadows seemed to shift when I wasn't looking at them. The forest felt alive with malevolence, as if the trees themselves wanted us gone or dead. Rachel, who was walking security next to me during one rotation, leaned close and whispered that she'd found blood on the trail behind us. Not human blood. Dark, almost black, with a smell like copper and rotting meat. The creature was wounded but following us anyway. Wounded predators were supposed to retreat, to hide and heal. This one was hunting despite its injuries, driven by something beyond animal instinct. That terrified me more than anything else we'd experienced. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in shades of red and orange, we reached a small clearing with an abandoned hunting blind on the far side. Mitchell called a halt. We were still 3 miles from the staging area. It would be full dark within the hour, and Wright needed rest. We'd make our stand here, fortify the position, and hold until first light. The clearing was roughly circular, maybe 60 feet across, with the hunting blind in the northeast corner elevated about 12 feet on a wooden platform. The blind was old but structurally sound. Mitchell and Torres quickly assessed the tactical situation. The elevated position would give us visibility and make it harder for anything to reach us. The clearing would force any attack to cross open ground where we'd have clear fields of fire. We moved right up into the blind as carefully as we could, then established defensive positions around the clearing's perimeter. Mitchell set up a watch rotation, 3 people in the blind with Wright, 3 positioned around the clearing on the ground. Everyone else would try to rest in shifts. We'd maintain the rotation through the night, staying alert and ready. I took the first ground watch with Rachel Foster and Trooper Garcia. We positioned ourselves roughly 20 feet apart at the clearing's edge, creating overlapping fields of fire that covered all approaches. The temperature was dropping fast, our breath misting in the air. Above us in the blind, I could hear Torres radioing for help on their emergency frequency. The mountains and dense forest made communication difficult, but he managed to get a partial message through to State Police Dispatch before the signal degraded completely. Full dark came at 7:30. We had flashlights and weapon-mounted lights, but Mitchell ordered us to use them sparingly. Light discipline would help preserve our night vision and make it harder for anything out there to target us. The moon was a thin crescent, providing almost no illumination. The forest around us became a wall of absolute blackness. At 8:15, we heard movement in the trees to the east. Something large was circling the clearing, staying just beyond the tree line, moving with deliberate slowness. We could hear branches snapping, the rustle of undergrowth being pushed aside, the occasional scrape of claws on bark. The sounds moved slowly around the clearing's perimeter, north to west to south, taking perhaps 20 minutes to complete the circuit. It was reconnoitering, learning our position, looking for weaknesses. Then the sound stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. I checked my watch obsessively, counting minutes, trying to predict when the next approach would come. My legs ached from standing motionless in the cold. My fingers were numb despite my gloves, but I didn't dare move, didn't dare make any sound that might draw attention. In the blind above me, I could hear Wright's labored breathing, punctuated by occasional moans. The sound carried too far in the stillness. At 9:40, Agent Webb, who had the best vantage point from the blind, whispered down to us. Movement at the tree line, directly south, about 40 yards out. He said something was standing there, watching us, tall enough that he could see its silhouette against the slightly lighter sky beyond the trees. He described it in careful, clinical detail. Bipedal stance, broad shoulders, head too large and wrong-shaped. Absolute stillness, like a statue. Not even breathing that he could detect. Mitchell's order to hold fire was whispered but firm. We needed to conserve ammunition, needed to keep our positions concealed as long as possible. The creature watched us for what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than 5 minutes. Then it melted back into the darkness without a sound, leaving us staring at empty space and wondering if we'd imagined it. But I knew we hadn't. That thing was real, and it was patient, and it was learning. Over the next 3 hours, it approached 4 more times, each approach from a different direction, testing different parts of our perimeter, never coming quite close enough to justify firing. It was smart, tactical, understanding that we had limited ammunition and that every shot we fired would deplete our resources. It was wearing us down psychologically, making us jump at shadows, exhausting us with constant vigilance. Around 11, Torres managed to get another message through to dispatch. The transmission was broken and full of static, but he conveyed the essentials. 1 dead from the earlier attack. We'd left Garcia's body, 2 critically injured, under sustained threat from unknown hostile, requesting immediate extraction. The response was garbled, but seemed to indicate helicopters at first light if weather permitted. That meant we had to survive 7 more hours. Agent Cole, who was in the blind with Wright and trying to keep him stable, reported that his condition was deteriorating. His breathing had become more labored, his skin was cold and clammy, his pulse was weak and thready. She didn't say he was dying, didn't need to. We all knew. Every hour we were stuck here reduced his chances of survival, but there was nothing we could do except hold our position and pray that dawn came before the creature decided to press its attack. At midnight, I rotated into the blind for my watch shift, climbing up the wooden ladder with hands that shook from cold and exhaustion. The elevated position gave me a comprehensive view of the clearing and the surrounding tree line, but it also made me feel exposed, vulnerable. Up here we were trapped if something managed to climb up to us. The only escape would be to jump 15 feet to the ground and hope we didn't break our legs. I found Wright unconscious but still breathing. Cole sat beside him, monitoring his vitals with what limited equipment we had, trying to keep him warm with our spare jackets. She looked exhausted, her face drawn and pale in the dim light from my shielded flashlight. She told me his pupils were unequal, suggesting increased intracranial pressure, probably bleeding in his brain. Without surgery soon he wouldn't make it. I wanted to tell her he'd be fine, that help was coming, but the lie stuck in my throat. Around 1 a.m. the temperature dropped dramatically. Our breath came out in thick clouds. Frost began to form on exposed metal surfaces. The cold was dangerous in itself. Hypothermia was a real threat, but we couldn't risk a fire. The light would destroy our night vision and make us perfect targets. We huddled together for warmth, but it wasn't enough. By 2 a.m. my teeth were chattering so hard I had to clench my jaw to stop them. That's when it made its first real assault. No warning, no preliminary circling. The creature came from the northeast at full speed, crossing the clearing in massive bounds that covered ground impossibly fast. We opened fire, every weapon from the blind and the ground positions. Tracer rounds arcing through the darkness, the reports overlapping into a continuous roar. I saw hits, saw the creature stagger as rounds impacted, but it kept coming. It reached the base of the blind and veered off at the last second, circling around and disappearing back into the forest. The entire attack lasted maybe 10 seconds. We'd fired perhaps 100 rounds, maybe more, and we'd driven it off, but only barely. My hands were shaking so badly I had trouble reloading. Around me I heard other people fumbling with magazines, cursing, breathing hard. We'd won this round, but we all knew we were running out of ammunition and time. Mitchell called up to the blind, asking for ammunition count. I checked with the others. We'd already gone through more than half our supply. At this rate, we'd be out before dawn. He made the call that I'd been dreading. Controlled fire only from this point forward. No sustained bursts, no panic shooting. Aimed shots only when we had clear targets. Every round had to count because we might not have enough to last the night. The next 2 hours were psychological torture. The creature circled us constantly just beyond clear visual range, making enough noise to keep us alert but never presenting a clear target. Occasionally we'd catch glimpses, a flash of movement between trees, the brief silhouette against slightly lighter sky, but never long enough to justify shooting, never solid enough to guarantee a hit. It was wearing us down, and it knew it. At 3:30, Agent Patterson, who was on ground watch below us, reported movement in multiple locations simultaneously. Either there was more than one creature or it was moving faster than seemed possible, creating the illusion of multiple attackers. Mitchell thought it was the latter, a deliberate tactic to make us waste ammunition shooting at shadows. But the uncertainty was almost worse than knowing. If there were more of them, we had no chance. None. At 4 a.m., Wright stopped breathing. Cole performed CPR, desperate and violent in the cramped space of the blind, compressions and rescue breaths, while I tried to help and mostly just got in the way. After 3 cycles, Wright gasped and resumed breathing on his own, but his pulse was barely detectable. Cole looked at me, and I saw defeat in her eyes. He was dying, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. The only question was whether he'd die here or die en route to a hospital. Then at 4:30, the creature made its final play. The sun wouldn't be up for another 90 minutes, but the sky was just beginning to show the faintest gray in the east. The creature seemed to understand this was its last chance, that daylight would somehow shift the advantage to us. It came from the west at full speed, hitting the blind supports with massive force. The thing that emerged from the trees 15 minutes later was not from our world. That's the only way I can describe it. It moved from shadow to open ground with fluid grace, and in the faint starlight I saw its true form for the first time. 7 feet tall, maybe more, with a body that suggested immense strength wrapped in dark fur. The head was a wolf's head, but larger, more intelligent, with eyes that caught the light and reflected it back in amber. It stood at the clearing's edge for perhaps 5 seconds, perfectly still, assessing us. Then it threw back its head and released that howl scream we'd heard earlier, the sound impossibly loud and filled with rage or hunger or something I couldn't name. The sound hit me like a physical blow, primal terror bypassing rational thought and going straight to the ancient part of my brain that remembered when humans were prey. We opened fire. Every weapon lit up the darkness, muzzle flashes creating a strobe effect that made everything seem unreal. I watched my rounds hit center mass, saw the impact tear into the creature's chest and shoulder. It staggered, but kept coming, crossing the clearing in massive bounds that covered ground faster than anything that size should move. It hit Garcia first. The trooper managed one scream before the creature's jaws closed on his throat and silenced him forever. Rachel and I were firing point blank now, less than 10 feet away, emptying our magazines into the thing's torso. Blood, dark and hot, splashed across us. The creature released Garcia's body and turned toward me. I saw its eyes up close, intelligent and filled with hate. I saw the teeth 3 inches long and designed to tear flesh. I saw the muscles bunching under the fur as it prepared to strike. I was dead, I knew it, with absolute certainty. There was no escaping something that fast and that strong. My magazine was empty, no time to reload, nowhere to run. Agent Cole saved my life. She'd been in the blind and now she jumped down, hitting the ground hard and opened up with her rifle on full automatic. The sustained burst caught the creature in the side, rounds stitching up its ribs. It spun away from me and backhanded Cole across the clearing. She hit a tree with a crack that I felt in my bones. The creature retreated finally, wounded and limping but still moving with terrifying speed. It crashed back into the trees and was gone. The entire attack had lasted perhaps 20 seconds. We'd fired over 200 rounds. Garcia was dead, throat torn out, gone before he hit the ground. Cole was unconscious, her left arm bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. Mitchell was screaming orders, getting everyone into the blind, establishing a secure perimeter with all of us in one defensible position. We dragged Cole up, checked her breathing and pulse. She was alive but needed serious medical attention. The same was true for Wright, who'd regained consciousness briefly during the firefight before passing out again. We left Garcia where he'd fallen. There was nothing we could do for him, and retrieving his body would mean leaving the blind's protection. Mitchell made the call over Patterson's objections. Patterson had been Garcia's partner in their field office. He wanted to bring him back. Mitchell had to physically restrain him and remind him that we couldn't help Garcia, but we could keep the rest of us alive. The blind was cramped with all 11 of us inside, but it was defensible. We had good sight lines in all directions, elevation advantage and enough ammunition to hold off a small army. What we didn't have was a way to evacuate 2 critically wounded people or any certainty that help would arrive before we ran out of luck. Torres managed to get another message through to dispatch around 11. The signal was broken and inconsistent, but he conveyed our situation. 1 dead, 2 critical, under attack from unknown hostile. He gave our coordinates and requested immediate extraction. The response was garbled, but seemed to indicate that help was coming at first light, weather permitting. The rest of the night was the longest of my life. The creature circled our position repeatedly, sometimes coming close enough that we could hear its breathing, deep and labored. It was wounded, we knew that, but it wouldn't leave. It wanted us. Every hour it would test our defenses, rushing the clearing from different directions, forcing us to fire and waste ammunition. By 3 a.m., we'd gone through 60% of our ammunition. Wright's breathing had become a wet rattle. Cole drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring things that didn't make sense. Mitchell and Torres took turns trying to raise dispatch with limited success. The rest of us watched the darkness and waited for the next attack. At 4:30, as the first hints of gray touched the eastern sky, the creature made its final attempt. It came from the west, moving faster than before despite its wounds, covering the clearing in 3 massive bounds. We fired everything we had. The blind shook from the recoil of 11 weapons firing simultaneously. The creature reached the base of the platform and began to climb. I was directly above it, firing straight down as it climbed. I saw my rounds impact its skull, saw bone and flesh tear, but it kept coming. Its claws gripped the wooden supports, pulling itself up with terrifying strength. The blind was 8 feet from the ground, then 6, then 4. I could smell it now, blood and wet fur and something ancient and wrong. Agent Briggs saved us all. He'd been carrying a flare gun as part of his emergency kit, standard equipment for wilderness operations, though rarely needed. In the chaos of the attack, with the creature's head rising above the platform's edge, those jaws opening to reveal teeth designed for tearing flesh, Briggs acted on instinct rather than thought. He shoved the muzzle of the flare gun directly into the creature's face, perhaps 6 inches from those intelligent, hate-filled eyes, and fired. The magnesium flare ignited at point-blank range, burning at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The creature's scream was unlike anything I'd ever heard, something between animal agony and almost human suffering. The sound cut through the night and echoed from the hills, primal and terrible. The creature fell backward off the ladder, clawing at its face where the flare had embedded itself in the orbital socket of its left eye. It hit the ground hard, thrashing in the dirt, the flare still burning with brilliant white light that illuminated the clearing like day. For the first time, we could see it clearly. 7.5 feet tall, heavily muscled, covered in dark brown fur that was almost black. The head was canine but larger than any wolf, with an elongated snout and ears that lay back against the skull. The burning flare had destroyed the left side of its face, the flesh blackened and peeling, the smell of burning meat and fur overwhelming. Despite the wound, despite the pain that must have been excruciating, the creature didn't die. It gathered itself, still clawing at its face, and began dragging itself toward the tree line. The movement was slower now, pained and desperate rather than controlled, but still purposeful. It was retreating, finally defeated not by our bullets, but by fire and agony. We watched it go, nobody firing, nobody moving, just watching this impossible thing crawl into the darkness. The flare burned for almost 10 minutes, a white-hot magnesium fire that couldn't be extinguished by anything the creature could do. We tracked its movement by that light, watching it drag itself deeper into the forest, leaving a trail of blood that looked black in the harsh illumination. Eventually it disappeared behind dense undergrowth, the light fading as distance and vegetation intervened. And then, finally, blessed silence. We stayed in the blind. Nobody suggested going after it. Nobody suggested pursuing to confirm a kill. We'd survived, barely, and that was enough. Mitchell posted guards while the rest of us tried to rest, though none of us really slept. We just sat in shock, processing what we'd experienced, waiting for dawn with desperate intensity. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to safety, to extraction, to being away from this place. Wright died at 5:15, just as the eastern sky was beginning to brighten from black to gray. Cole had been monitoring his pulse, feeling it grow weaker and more irregular. Then it stopped. She performed CPR again, more desperately this time. Compressions and breaths, while tears streamed down her face. But he was gone. Too much internal damage, too much time without proper medical care. He'd held on as long as he could, but it wasn't enough. The FBI contingent included myself, Special Agent Rachel Foster, a man in his 50s, who specialized in forensics and evidence collection, Special Agent Marcus Webb from the Hostage Rescue Team, Special Agent Jennifer Cole from Violent Crimes, Special Agent Thomas Briggs, who handled organized crime, and Special Agent Kevin Patterson from our Detroit field office. We were all experienced field agents, physically fit and trained in firearms and defensive tactics. This wasn't supposed to be dangerous, it was meant to be educational. We covered his body with a space blanket, secured it as best we could in the cramped blind, and waited for the helicopter. The sun rose at 6:30, painting the forest in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene after the darkness of the night. Beautiful morning light after a night of horror. The contrast made everything feel surreal, like we'd slipped between realities and were now watching the world through glass. The state police helicopter arrived at 7:15, the sound of its rotors the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. They landed in the clearing, medical personnel jumping out before the skids touched ground. They loaded Wright's body first, Then Cole, who could barely walk from exhaustion and shock. Mitchell briefed the pilot while Torres guided the medical team to Garcia's body, still lying where he'd fallen almost 12 hours before. I rode out on the second helicopter, watching the forest drop away beneath us. From the air it looked peaceful, beautiful even. Miles of green canopy broken by occasional clearings, streams catching the morning sun, the kind of wilderness that people photograph and frame. It was impossible to believe that something like what we'd faced could exist in such a place, but I knew it did. I'd seen it. I'd fired into it and watched it shrug off rounds that should have been lethal. The crime scene team arrived within hours, a full forensic unit from the state police backed by FBI technical specialists. They documented everything: the clearing, the blind, the blood trails. They found the burned-out flare casing almost a quarter-mile into the forest, surrounded by more blood and torn vegetation where something had thrashed in agony. They followed the blood trail for another half-mile before losing it in a rocky area where tracking was impossible. They collected blood samples, tissue samples, hair samples. They photographed Garcia's wounds in horrific detail, documenting the massive trauma to his throat and neck. They mapped the clearing and the surrounding forest with GPS precision. They recovered bullets from trees and collected spent brass. Everything was done professionally, thoroughly, creating a comprehensive forensic picture of the incident. And then, within 24 hours, all of that evidence disappeared into federal custody. The debriefing started that afternoon. Not local FBI, not even Detroit field office, but people from headquarters that none of us had ever met. Counterintelligence division, which made no sense for what should have been a straightforward animal attack investigation. They separated us, interviewed us individually, recorded everything we said. They were polite, professional, and absolutely ruthless in their questioning. They showed me photographs of the creature's blood under microscopy. The DNA was bizarre, chimeric, showing markers from multiple species that shouldn't be compatible. Canine primarily, but with sequences that didn't match any known species in the database. There were anomalies, genetic markers that suggested either extreme mutation or something else entirely. One of the scientists, a woman from Fort Detrick who looked like she hadn't slept in days, said the DNA was impossible. That was her word. Impossible. Then they showed me the NDAs. Multiple documents, each covering different aspects of the incident. One for the creature itself, another for the DNA results, a third for the tactical details of the engagement. I was told these were matters of national security, that public disclosure could cause mass panic and endanger ongoing research into unknown biological entities. I was told my career, my pension, and possibly my freedom depended on my silence. I signed. We all signed. What choice did we have? The official report was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. Garcia had died from a bear attack while conducting training operations. The bear, startled and aggressive, had been engaged by the training group and subsequently escaped. Wright had been injured in the encounter and died from complications during evacuation. Cole suffered a broken arm during the defensive action. The massive ammunition expenditure was justified as necessary force against a dangerous predator. There was no mention of bipedal movement, of intelligence, of coordinated stalking behavior. No mention of wounds that should have been lethal but weren't. No mention of the bizarre DNA results or the fact that we'd tracked the creature for half a mile after it should have been dead from blood loss alone. Just a bear attack, tragic but routine, the kind of thing that happens occasionally when humans venture into wilderness areas. Agent Wright was buried with full honors 3 weeks later. I attended the funeral, stood with the other survivors as taps played and the flag was folded. His wife received it with dignity, thanked us for serving with her husband. Had no idea how he'd really died. I wanted to tell her the truth, wanted her to know that he'd died protecting us from something that shouldn't exist, but I stayed silent. The NDA, the threats, the weight of government authority kept my mouth shut. The psychological impact was immediate and severe. Cole developed PTSD, nightmares and panic attacks that ended her career within 6 months. Patterson requested transfer to white-collar crime and never worked field operations again. Rachel left the bureau entirely, Last I heard, she was teaching criminal justice at a small college in Vermont. Webb stayed in HRT but developed a drinking problem that eventually forced him out. Briggs buried himself in work, taking on case after case. Anything to avoid thinking about that night. I stayed with the FBI for another 18 years, worked cases, got promoted, did my job. But I never went into remote wilderness again. Never volunteered for rural fugitive tracking. Never took assignments that would put me in isolated forests. My colleagues probably thought I'd gone soft, lost my edge. I didn't care. I knew what was out there in the darkness, knew that there were things our training and weapons couldn't protect us from. Over the years I did research, quiet inquiries that wouldn't trigger attention. The Michigan Dogman sightings went back to 1887, concentrated in the northern Lower Peninsula and Upper Peninsula. Most were dismissed as hoaxes or misidentification, but the pattern was there. Clusters of sightings every 7 to 10 years, always in remote forested areas, always describing the same basic creature. Large bipedal canine head, immensely strong. I found references to similar creatures in other states. The Beast of Bray Road in Wisconsin, the Werewolf of Henrico County in Virginia, the Skinwalker legends in the Southwest. Different names, different contexts, but the descriptions were remarkably consistent. Something was out there, something that had learned to avoid humans, but occasionally was seen or encountered, something that official channels worked very hard to discredit and bury. I spoke with Torres once, years later, at Garcia's funeral. We didn't discuss that night directly, our NDAs were still in force, but he told me that the state police had quietly changed their wilderness training protocols. No more exercises in that part of the Manistee National Forest. No more small groups going deep into isolated areas without satellite communication and heavy weapons. They'd learned something from that night, even if they couldn't officially acknowledge what. I'm dying now, and the fear of government retaliation means nothing compared to the fear of dying with this secret. People need to know that there are things in our forests that don't fit our understanding of the natural world. Things that are intelligent and dangerous and very much real. The official denial is a lie. The cover-up is real. And somewhere in those Michigan woods, something walks upright in the darkness. Something that killed 2 federal agents and nearly killed the rest of us. I've carried this for 23 years, the weight of it pressing down like a stone. I dream about that night, about Garcia's face as the creature's jaws closed on his throat, about the intelligence in those amber eyes. I dream about how close we came to dying in that forest, how our weapons and training meant nothing against something that strong and that fast. If you're reading this, understand that I'm violating federal law by sharing this information. Understand that I don't care. I'm beyond their reach now, beyond threats and consequences. But you're not. If you go looking for proof, if you try to verify this story, you'll find official denials and warnings. You'll be told I'm crazy or lying or seeking attention. Don't believe them. Believe me when I tell you that the Michigan Dogman is real. Believe me when I say that the FBI knows it's real and has worked to hide that fact for decades. Believe me when I warn you to stay out of those woods, especially the remote areas where cell coverage fails and the trees grow dense enough to hide a nightmare. I hope this testimony reaches someone who can make a difference. I hope the truth eventually comes out, even if that happens long after I'm gone. But mostly I hope no one else has to experience what we did that night. No one should have to face something like that. No one should have to carry that memory. My name is Special Agent David Carver. I served my country for 23 years, and on March 16, 2000, in the Manistee National Forest, I saw something that the government still insists doesn't exist. This is my sworn testimony. This is the truth they tried to bury. This is what happened. For more interesting stories like this, consider subscribing.